Can you expand on the prohibition point that you made there at how that increased criminalization for substances? Because that's also when um, we create the infrastructure for the war on drugs, which explodes, of course,
Oh yeah,
in Nixon and Reagan.
sure. Yeah. So the federal government was not really involved in criminal prosecution all that much prior to Prohibition, right? So when Prohibition takes effect, prior to that time, crime is sort of thought of as a local problem. But then crime, in scare quotes, explodes overnight, right? And you have, President Hoover and all these other figures coming out and saying, look, we've got to do something about this because now all of a sudden we've got all this crime and we got to go after the bootleggers and the people who are enabling the bootleggers and the people who enable the people who enable the bootleggers. And it's not just the bootleggers, folks, it's everybody. Everybody's doing crime everywhere. And so we've got to be able to stamp this out, and we got to be able to, due process is nice, but we've got to be able to do it quickly. So what happens is the federal government gets involved in criminal prosecutions in a way that it never had before. The agency that eventually becomes the FBI, it explodes. They add thousands of new agents to that. The federal prison population triples during the period of Prohibition. From I think by 1933, the population had tripled in just 13 years. And there's just all this capacity for the federal government to enforce these laws, and then Congress gets on board. It's like, okay, well, we've got all these toys, right? The federal government has this capacity now. We should start making more crime for them to go after and make it easier for them to do their jobs and prosecute under. So they're passing crime bill after crime bill after crime bill, even when Prohibition goes away. This is the important piece, right? When Prohibition proves to be unsustainable, they take it away. But that next year, after the 21st Amendment passes, Congress passes 9 new federal crime bills, like these omnibus crime bills that will allow federal law enforcement this new mechanism that they've created for the federal government to enforce the law. Now it has something to do, right? Since Prohibition's gone ahead, it needs something to do. So they pass all these new crime bills. And and President Roosevelt's Attorney General gives this address where he's like, well, look, the number one threat to the fabric of American society is narcotics. It's not alcohol anymore. Now it's narcotics, right? And that's sort of the beginning seeds of the drug war that really took off, as you say, during the Nixon and Reagan eras.
And a lot of I don't know if everyone realizes how in this time period too specific drugs were stereotypically linked to different racial groups. There's a reason that cannabis became marijuana. There's a reason that there were articles in Southern papers and also in Northern papers about but I think particularly in the Louisiana area about black men who were able to stay up all night because of cocaine and rape your women, and then opium being associated with Asian American immigrants, and that was, I think, a way to launder that infrastructure from the Prohibition era as a way to target racial minority groups in this country from even before the drug war. That was the infrastructure.
Yes, indeed. And think about plea bargaining's role in this. This is a thing I talk a lot about in the book. Because we've made a system that is really unconcerned with fact finding, with truth seeking, or any sort of processes. Because we've made a system that is fundamentally concerned with speed above all else. We've also that requires a lot of discretion, right? A lot of discretion by law enforcement, a lot of discretion by prosecutors, because if the police go out to arrest somebody, they're pretty sure, right, 9.7 times out of 10, that arrest is going to end in some kind of conviction, because the prosecutor has so much power, right? So they're going to use some kind of carrot, some kind of stick. They're going to keep them in jail for forever, or they're going to jack up the charges, or they're going to do whatever to get them to plead guilty to something. So police are less careful, and they know that they're never, in most cases, are never even going to have to present any kind of evidence or give any kind of testimony or be put under any kind of truthoscope, right? So if you have a cop that's a racist cop that just decides, I want to go out and arrest only black people. I'm never going to arrest white people ever. And that's what they go out and do. Well, it's very difficult to hold them accountable because lo and behold, all those arrests end up in a conviction of some kind, right? And so the police officer, no matter how racist they are, they're vindicated in their actions. They're vindicated in their racism by the system because it's just set up to result in a conviction of some kind, no matter what. And so, great job. You did your job. You made an arrest, and that arrest ended in a conviction. Same goes for prosecutors. If prosecutors just decide, I'm going to prosecute all the black people on my docket more harshly, what stops them from doing that, right? So you jack up the charges. You can threaten them with anything. You could threaten them with extensive prison sentences at higher charges and compounded sentences and death. Even you could put the death penalty on the table for some defendants, and you're going to do that more harshly, as we've seen time and time again. Prosecutors do this more harshly for people of color. And what stops them from doing that? Nothing, because all of these prosecutions, virtually all of them, end in convictions of some kind.
In fact, I mean, the incentives actually go the other way because the more convictions you get, the more successful your department is perceived as. The same thing with cops, right? There's financial incentives for them, arrests wise. So it's a beast that feeds one another, and it's your book and your analysis makes me realize that just criticism of cops and the policing in this country as an institution is insufficient when the other side of this is also the prosecution that feeds off of that very system.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is if you look at the example in Alaska that I talk a lot about in the book, or if you look at New Orleans, there's some other jurisdictions that have experimented with a reduction in plea bargaining in discrete periods of time. In Alaska, this is the clearest example. In Alaska, you've got an attorney general that comes in that has a lot of control because of the way state law is and says, well, we're just going to clamp down on plea bargaining. All the plea bargaining is going to go through me. We're going to do a whole lot less. We're going to have a whole lot more trials. And everyone's freaking out. This is in the 1970s. Everyone's freaking out because, oh, how are we going to do this? There's too much crime and it's just going to crash the system. And there's no way we can handle all these trials. And there's just no way we can do this without plea bargaining virtually everything. And that turned out to be not true. And in fact, it had a very positive effect on the system overall. When you talk to, and I talked to a bunch of the lawyers that were around during that period of time, they said, yes, trials did go up. The number of trials did go up quite a bit, but also the number of charges went down. So what happens is, prosecutors are forced, if they can't plead all these cases and just run this sort of bureaucratic mill of conviction after conviction after conviction, if they have to look at the cases and assume that they're going to take them to trial, they get a whole lot more selective about what they prosecute. And in fact, in Alaska, what happened was prosecutors went from rejecting 4% of the cases that police brought to them to rejecting 44% overnight. When this new policy was put in place. Of course, this makes police very mad, and it makes prosecutors and police do this for a time. It makes them fight each other because these police are bringing them all these arrests. And, unlike before where they could just bring them anything and walk away with a conviction almost for sure, prosecutors are saying, look, I'm not going to take that. We're just going to dismiss this. This is a terrible case. You didn't cross your T's. You didn't dot your I's. I don't have good enough evidence here. But over time, even the police in Alaska say, well, this is actually better because it's forcing us to do better police work and bring in cases that we know we can get convictions on, and to have charges that more accurately reflect the bad conduct that we arrested somebody for in the first place. So it had an enormous system-wide effect in Alaska for a short period of time, and then a new attorney general came in and changed everything back to the way it was.